and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, hi, my name's Zoe. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. I really do hope that you decide to subscribe, and if you're a current subscriber, please make sure that your bell is on, as YouTube doesn't like suggesting the kind of content I like to make. So today we are doing another true crime video, and I have another unsolved case for you. Now this case doesn't have a lot of information at all. It's a little bit frustrating, but I thought it was a really interesting case to bring to your guys' attention because I haven't really seen this case talked about a lot online. Today we are talking about the murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott was born on the 23rd of April 1948 to her parents Jacob and Vera Scott, and the whole family lived in California, USA. She lived a pretty much normal life. She was quiet and shy, and a lot of her friends had described her as being an introvert. Throughout her life she was a really hard worker and she did really well in school. In 1976 Dorothy gave birth to a little boy called Sean. I'm not quite sure what the situation is around Sean's father and his involvement with Sean, but from what I can see online, Dorothy was solely a single parent. She did everything herself. She absolutely loved Sean. He was her life and she worked ever so hard just to give him the best life possible. Dorothy worked two jobs, one at a swingers sack shop which her father partly owned, and another at Custom John's head shop. Now Dorothy didn't mind working two jobs because it meant that she had the income to look after her little boy independently. Dorothy's parents lived down the road from where she worked, so this was ideal for her. Her parents lived down the road from where she worked, so this was ideal for Dorothy. She could just drop Sean off in the morning and then pick him up when she was finished at work. Dorothy's work colleagues described her as being a conscientious worker. She was polite and kind to everybody, and she was just overall a pleasure to be around. She also loved to go to church in her spare time when she wasn't at work because she was very invested in her Christian faith. Many of her friends said that she was a great mother, and despite being on her own, Sean was always her main priority. The 28th of May 1980 was like no other day for Dorothy. She dropped 4-year-old Sean off with her parents and made her way to work. She had a meeting that evening at 9 PM at the swingers shop that she worked at, so she informed her parents that she would be back a little later than usual to pick Sean up. There was nothing out of the ordinary during that day, and she attended the meeting at 9 PM with her colleagues. Conrad Boston was one of Dorothy's colleagues who was there at the meeting that evening, and it was quite clear to quite a few people in that room that he wasn't looking very well at all. He looked really poorly. He started to complain about a sore that he had on his arm, and it was quite clear that there was something wrong with it. It was all red and swollen. It quite clearly needed some sort of medical attention. Dorothy and one of her colleagues, Pam Head, decided to leave the meeting early and take Conrad Boston to the hospital to be checked over. On the way to the hospital they stopped off at Dorothy's parents so she could inform them of what was happening and let them know that they would have to have Sean a little bit longer, and she wasn't sure what time she would pick him up. Unfortunately, in them days, mobile phones weren't around, so she couldn't just call and keep them updated on the situation. It was sort of a guessing game as to when she would pick her son up. Dorothy changed her scarf, got back into the car, and the three of them made their way to UC Irvine Medical Center. Conrad was treated in hospital. They said that he had been bitten by a black widow spider, so they decided to keep his eye on him a little while, try him with some medicine, and then at around 11 PM he was discharged. When leaving the hospital it was clear that Conrad still wasn't well. He was on medication, and of course he was still quite poorly. So Dorothy offered to go and get her car from the parking lot and drive it round to the entrance so that Conrad didn't have to walk very far. Pam stayed with Conrad near the entrance whilst Dorothy nipped to the toilet, and then she left to go and get her car. They waited near the entrance for around 20 minutes when they saw Dorothy's white Toyota 1973 station wagon driving towards them. The car was driving at some speed with the headlights blinding. The car was going so fast that Pam and Conrad couldn't make out who was driving the car. Pam and Conrad were quite shocked and confused about the situation, but they just assumed that Dorothy would come back and turn around and come and pick them up. So they decided to wait even longer at the entrance of the hospital. They waited around for a couple more hours and Dorothy was nowhere to be seen. They decided to call Dorothy's parents and see if they had seen Dorothy, but unfortunately they hadn't seen her all evening either. Now everybody was getting a little concerned. So Pam decided to call the local police station and report Dorothy as missing. Police were not interested in this case or this missing persons case at all. Dorothy was an adult and had only been missing for a mere couple of hours. So they thought there was some reasonable explanation. Maybe she didn't want to be found. Maybe she had just wanted a break. And they thought that she would just turn up. Several hours after Dorothy's disappearance, her car was found and on fire, around 10 miles from Santa Ana. This is when concern really stepped in. Now of course her family were already worried, but this is when police started to be concerned for her well-being. Immediately, local police stepped up their search. Shortly after the discovery of the car, Dorothy's parents, Vera and John, started to get anonymous phone calls from a man. One of the times that this man called the house phone, Vera was home alone and she answered the phone. The man said, "Are you related to Dorothy?" She said yes. The man then told her, "I've got her," before hanging up. They immediately informed police of this caller and this was the first real clue that they got in this case. Officers asked Vera and Jacob not to speak to media at all about this possible lead as it could jeopardise the case. But these calls were all too familiar to Vera. Dorothy had been plagued for months and months before her disappearance with anonymous phone calls from a man. This man had gone on for months and months, obsessing over Dorothy, threatening her, and just being really creepy. Dorothy had told people around her that she believed this man was stalking her. She received calls at work and at home from this man, and he would tell her how much he loved her, and then the next minute he would threaten her. He would sometimes even say, "I know you've been in such place, I know you've been wearing this, I know where you go to work." And it really started to creep Dorothy, and this person was just really taunting Dorothy day in, day out. It got to the point where this man left things on Dorothy's doorstep. He left dead roses on her car, and he even told Dorothy that he would kidnap her, get her alone and cut her up into millions of pieces so nobody could find her. She had told her parents that she recognised this man's voice, but she just couldn't put a face or a name to the voice. The calls got so horrible and so disgusting in the week leading to her death that she actually started self-defense lessons and was even considering buying a handgun to protect herself. A week after Dorothy's disappearance and a week of her parents getting these phone calls, they had had enough. They wanted to know exactly who this person was and they wanted more information on their daughter's case. Her parents had enough of sitting around and they felt that the police were not doing enough for Dorothy's case. They decided to speak to the media about the calls that they were receiving in hopes that somebody had some information that could help find Dorothy. The day that the article was published in the local newspaper, the editor received a phone call from a man claiming to have killed Dorothy. The unknown male had said, "I killed Dorothy Scott. I loved her, she cheated on me, she denied it, and I killed her." Even though this could be somebody just messing around with the editor or messing around with the case because of the fact that the family had been receiving anonymous calls, everybody involved in this case was sure enough that this man had something to do with Dorothy's disappearance. He described what Dorothy was wearing down to a T, and he also knew exactly what Dorothy was doing that evening at the hospital. How did he know this information when it wasn't public knowledge? So it's clear that this person was either responsible or they had some sort of insider knowledge. Police started looking into people who could possibly be involved in Dorothy's disappearance, and they started with her ex, Sean's father, but he had an alibi that totally checked out, so they said that he had no involvement in this case. While police continued their investigations, the calls to Dorothy's mother didn't stop. They receive calls every single day, just taunting and taunting them. Unfortunately, technologies in the 80s wasn't the best, as you can imagine. Police did try and trace these calls, but the caller wouldn't stay on the phone long enough for them to do so. On the 6th of August 1984, a construction worker was doing his daily jobs off Canyon Road in Santa Ana when he came across human remains. He had discovered a skull, 2 thigh bones and an arm. A pink ring and a watch was found with the remains. Sadly, it was revealed that the remains did belong to Dorothy, and for some reason she had also been buried with dog bones on top of her. I've not been able to find out a theory or a reason why the dog bones were buried there. Maybe it was to try and avoid people from finding Dorothy. I'm not too sure why the killer would have done that. If you have any ideas about that, please let me know down below. The media got wind of this news and printed articles very quickly. Once the paper was printed, Vera again got a call from this anonymous caller, and he kept asking Vera, "Is Dorothy there?" This just added further torment to Vera. She had literally just found out that her daughter had died. The calls continued for the next few days until Jacob answered the phone. And when Jacob answered the phone, the caller hung up, and in fact he never called again. It's almost like the caller knew that Jacob would recognise him. There was a theory that one of Dorothy's ex-colleagues, Mike Butler, who also worked at the swingers shop, could be responsible for these phone calls and possibly for her murder. It is totally possible that Jacob and Mike Butler would have crossed paths in their life, so it's totally possible that Jacob could pick him out of a crowd and recognise his voice. Is that the reason why this caller hung up? I am not sure whether police looked into this theory and debunked it or did an investigation into this person. If anybody knows that information, please let me know down below. I did search for a little while to try and find that information out, but I literally couldn't find anything else out about Mike Butler. Sean, Dorothy's son, does highly believe this theory and believe that Mike Butler is somehow involved in his mother's murder, and he works hard every single day to try and get justice for Dorothy. Her family was taunted for over 4 years with calls from this anonymous caller, and it didn't bring up any information at all, despite the fact that this person clearly had some sort of insight into this case that other people didn't. My heart honestly goes out to them, because I don't know how they coped, how they felt during this whole time of being taunted. It just really breaks my heart that somebody, even if they wasn't involved in Dorothy's murder, how could they taunt a family that is going through that? It's just disgusting. It's truly disgusting, and it's truly heartbreaking that the police could not pick up any information from these calls. Nobody deserves to go through what Dorothy and her family went through, especially someone as caring as Dorothy. Even in the last few hours of her life, she was caring for somebody else. To this day, the case is unsolved and her family are no closer to justice. Her parents, Vera and Jacob, passed away before finding out any answers. Her son, Sean, is continuing his search for his mother's killer and is working really hard to try and get some sort of justice and some sort of information, and I really hope that he does find out what happened to his mother, because that's the last thing he deserves. So that is all for today's case. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I know it's a tough one because there's not a lot of information out there, but these unsolved cases need to be talked about so that hopefully somebody comes forward with information and helps the families get the answers that they deserve. So if you did enjoy this video, please give it a massive thumbs up. Leave a comment if you've got to the end. How about today we comment watermelon? Don't tell anybody else why you're commenting it, just comment watermelon down below. Also, the engagement does really well for me. I noticed my last video wasn't monetized because YouTube doesn't like true crime, and that video didn't get anywhere. It didn't really get pushed to anybody. So if you're seeing this video and you didn't see my last video, make sure you go and watch it. I've just noticed that the whole video I have been sort of not in the frame correctly, but it doesn't matter, does it? Give this video a massive thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and I shall see you in my next true crime video. Bye.